Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Game Changer. I'm Mariam Zia. Tonight we will delve into the critical conversations surrounding the happenings at COP28. Of course, we know that COP28 is a significant event that is happening in Dubai, and of course Pakistan is participating in this summit. Pakistan has been a proactive advocate for climate finance. When we talk about COP28, of course, we know that in COP27, Pakistan advocated for loss and damage fund, and in COP28, we're talking about discussions are happening from all over the world around the operationalization of loss and damage fund. In today's program, we will be talking about these conversations that are going to be shaping the future of our planet. To discuss this and more, we will be talking about different dimensions of this climate finance, how this is going to be distributed among the global south, and the role of global north as well. Of course, we will be talking about all these issues, but let's have a watch about what Prime Minister Anwaar-ul-Haq Kakar said at COP28.
It is critical that under UAE's leadership, COP28 also activates the means of implementation, that is climate finance, technology transfer, and capacity building for developing countries. Climate justice demands that the developing countries be enabled to achieve the sustainable development goals even as they contribute to climate objectives. The provision of sufficient, additional, predictable, grant-based climate finance by developed countries is imperative. The 100 billion commitment for climate finance must be fulfilled. And such finance should not be at the cost of development finance, nor add to the already high debt burden of the developing countries. Developed countries must take the lead in raising global mitigation ambition, commensurate with their economic standing and historical responsibility, and then help developing countries do the same. We need to achieve global resilience through delivering an ambitious outcome in the form of a framework for the global goal on adaptation. At least half of climate finance must be allocated to adaptation.
Right, of course, we were listening to Prime Minister Anwaar-ul-Haq Kakar, and of course, Prime Minister said that we need to achieve global resilience. And he also talked about the responsibility of developed countries when it comes to the moral responsibility as well as the emissions that are affecting the developing countries. We'll be talking more about it. Pakistan's proactive voice at COP28, and of course the role of other countries, leaders and delegates from around 200 countries are participating in this significant event, and that is going to shape the future of our planet. So these conversations are very important for countries, developing countries specifically like Pakistan. We will be talking about this in today's show. To discuss this and more, we're joined in the studios by Mr. CHNAGER Khan, who is Senior Analyst. Welcome to the program. We're also joined by Mr. Humayun Khan, who is Senior Analyst. Welcome to the program. And we're joined online by Dr. Stan Javed, who is Economist and Senior Analyst. Welcome to the program. Of course, let me start with you, Mr. CHNAGER. When we talk about this COP28, Pakistan has been a proactive voice. Of course, technical sessions are in progress at the moment because COP28 is going to last till December 12, or maybe it may exceed 1 or 2 days. What are your key takeaways from the happenings that have taken place so far?
So Mariam, as we discussed earlier as well in previous programs, the whole push behind the COP28 will be focused on the execution of the loss and damages funds. And Pakistan, represented by our Prime Minister Anwaar-ul-Haq Kakar, is the leading voice when it comes to the collective voices of the developing countries, in which they are asking the developed world to fulfill their obligations in mitigation and adaptation and the execution of the loss and damage fund as well. So previously in COP28, Pakistan played a very leadership role in the establishment of this fund, and now Pakistan is playing a very vital role in convincing the developed countries in the execution and the starting of this fund. So there are like a few developments that are taking place. Now most of the countries have now taken on board the World Bank. So this loss and damage fund will be housed at the World Bank for the next 4 years. Other than that, the collective commitments that were required by the developing countries to start adaptation and mitigation
by the
plans.
Developed countries.
By obviously the developing countries will be needing most of the finance.
Of course.
So this will be financed by the developed countries. And the requirement that was coming around was around $100 billion. So right now, most of the developed nations, they have committed funds, but those funds have now come up to around $500 million as we speak.
Of course, there's still a gap. We will be talking about this gap later in the program. But Mr. Humayun, let me start with the basic question. What are your key takeaways from COP28, and how do you think that this leadership summit on climate is going to be shaping the future of our planet?
Thank you, Mariam. I guess this is probably the most important summit with most of the world leadership present there, and some through their emissaries. And I guess not ever before the world has ever realized that how climate change could affect our lives, although it is becoming a new normal the way catastrophes are happening. But nonetheless, I guess on this particular forum, as Shayar was mentioning, I guess the biggest success was the operationalization of the losses and damages fund. Although they are still very much short of the pledges that they have made there, but still it's a beginning. The second thing is climate finance is something which is the most important aspect when it comes to the global south or the developing countries. And the pledges that are being made and will be made in the coming days and months maybe fell short of the expectation, but it's just a beginning. And I guess if this continues and with this vigor that the global south was represented, G77 plus China, Pakistan and many other global south countries, I guess the realization is slowly creeping in. There's a lot to be done. There's a lot to be done, but I guess the start has just taken place.
Right.
And we will see positive outcomes in future.
We will see positive outcomes in future. But Dr. Sain, do you think that this realization is actually creeping in, like Mr. Humayun mentioned? Do you think there is realization among the leaders from the developed countries, specifically when we talk about climate action and the urgency of climate action? Do you think there is realization, or do you think that there is more talk than action?
Yes, of course. I mean, like, for example, Pakistan is the biggest victim of this climate change impact. And this climate change impact on Pakistan is like in numbers. Of course, it is the disastrous number. We have paid the actual, disaster or catastrophe out of whole of the impact. Over 33 million people were directly affected, with the stranging 20.6 million requiring urgent humanitarian assistance. And then the consequences were dire. About 7.9 million people were displaced and over 2 million houses were destroyed. And one must know that the over $30 million of economic losses. Last year, massive flooding in Pakistan fueled over 100% increase in the malaria cases across the country. WHO, and also you have heard that the Gate Foundation is also working on in this malaria sort of a thing. So assessment undertaken by the National Disaster Management Authority (NDMA) shows that extreme climate event between the 1994 to 2013 have resulted in an average annual economic losses of almost $4 billion. So in overall, the current adaptation finance estimate at around $21 billion, which is a huge number. And the adaptation need of the developing country also stand of the 387 billion per year till 2030. This is a very important amount we need to calculate as per the financial segregation. So according to the national study conducted by 2016, the Pakistan adaptation need were between the 7 to 14 US dollar and billion per annum, and these have been increased exponentially since then. So there is a huge potential for the adaptation in Pakistan, and particularly strengthening the fortified the flood infrastructure and also enhancing the resilience of the local communities to adverse the impact of the climate change. Whereas the three very much important thing is the climate finance, capacity building, and technology. These are the few important straight lines from the premier, what he expressed his word on the World Forum, which is very much important, and
Right.
he called up immediately executing 100 billion commitment made in Paris during the 200
Of course,
2015
Pakistani
and conference to
premier
ensure
called for
climate ability.
action when we talk about execution of this crucial climate fund. But how do you think that this COP28 is going to be highlighting the disparity that exists when we talk about the ticking points, the alarming situation faced by the global south and the actions taken by global north?
Yeah, so see, this is very much important. Like global, from the global north to global south, Pakistan is in the dire need. Actually, the whole of the carbonation or the carbon, when they talk about the carbon elimination, nobody is talking and nobody is on the floor. So we are, focusing on the subject that where how can we financing overall subject. I mean, we don't need just the care, we don't need just the fund raising on this very issue. This is a climate issue and we are the victim. So if I talk about the China, for example, for about 90% of the carbon is being used by China, and then same is the 44% is being more than 44% is being used till 90s. And then if I talk more than when there is no talk about the green energy, before that the whole of the Europe is using the coal more than 70 to 80% and less above all. So from the global north to global south, but the most impact area is Pakistan. So whole of our river, whole of our climate, whole of our climate culture is completely catastrophied. And now the monsoon or the more than monsoon, so the whole of the budget is quite impossible. So
Right, of course. And how do you think that, of course, we are talking about renewable energies as well. And how do you think that about Pakistan's role in this significant event, specifically when we talk about Living Indus initiative and, of course, Pakistan's role in overall advocating for the rights of developing countries?
So, as you talk about the Indus initiative, this is very much important and pertinent question. This year, Pakistan presented a comprehensive national adoption plan that includes the launch of innovative Living Indus initiative, which is very impressive word. So, to restore the ecological health of the river, this is very much important point, and world must learn these things from us. That the umbrella initiative emerged from the extensive consultation with the stakeholder, resulting the set of the 25 living intervention and emphasize nature-based solution and eco-based adoption approaches. So the Pakistan, we need a minimum indicative investment between 11 to 17 billion dollar. I'm quoting the word, and this is my, after calculating the financial element from $11 to $17 billion over next 15 years to mobilize the public sector, private sector, citizens, and communities. So Recharge Pakistan is the first concrete step. With this framework, the flagship project with the international climate finance of the near about 78 million in the center of the effort in reducing the future flooding and drought impacts. And the Recharge Pakistan project, part of the Living Indus initiative, is expected to benefit millions of the citizens, serve as a model of global climate initiative. So if you talk about the retreating the promise made at the COP, then I'll continue with this discussion.
Of course, of course. Thank you very much for your valuable input, Dr. Hasnain Javed. And of course, we will continue our discussion in the studios. When we talk about environmental degradation, Chair Yar, what's your take on this? That how these conversations are leading towards solutions? And what are the issues that the discussions are pointing towards when we talk about renewable energy resources? And of course, there are a lot of alternatives that are being discussed, and there are discussions around phase out and phase down. Can you elaborate on those discussions?
So, Mariam, this is a very important question. When it comes to energy needs of developing countries, they're like not the same as you compare them with developed countries. Developed countries basically have a history of using all of these energy resources. They started from coal, They moved into hydro. They also used nuclear. They used like alternative energies as well, like solar, wind, and all of those. So they have like experience of like an evolutionary stage in which all of these developed countries passed through, and now they're at a time or stage where they can move away from the traditional sources of energy into more renewable sources of energy. So what's the difference between developed countries and developing countries? So developing countries are in the process of industrialization. So they are at that stage where the developed countries were 50 years ago. Okay. So this like gap in development and the economic evolution that the developing countries is going through, so they're facing challenges given the fact that now the whole devastating effects of climate change are so pronounced that even developing countries cannot really rely solely on energy producing facilities which are outdated and goes against the standards of environment. For example, coal power plants. Even hydel power plants like dams, a lot of like scientists are now saying that they're very damaging to the ecological health of that area. When it comes to coal power plants, it's devastating when it comes to the crops, the agriculture, and the ecology.
And countries like India are using
a lot of it. Unfortunately, Pakistan is as well. You know, when we talk about like our coal projects as well, a lot of like, again, Western countries basically say you should like move towards alternative.
But that is just a a drop in the ocean when we talk about the effects that we are suffering.
Exactly.
So Humayun, when we talk about this environmental degradation, there is a lot of discussion surrounding Paris Agreement and keeping the temperature down to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Can you elaborate on that? How have countries that are signatories to the Paris Agreement fulfilled their promises, and also the discussions surrounding fossil fuels as well?
You know, there is a big debate going on in terms of the usage of energy happening throughout the world. And particularly the use of fossil fuel is something which has contributed to this global warming at a very significant pace. And even as we speak today, there's the fourth day of ministerial high-level dialogue on losses and damages, and the global stock taking is happening, where every 5 years after the Paris Agreement, countries are supposed to discuss what are their global emission targets and how to reduce that. They're called NDCs, nationally determined contributions. So in that, I guess the consensus which has been developed by the global south, particularly G77 plus China, is the text needs to be more elaborate. The text needs to be more clear in terms of these NDCs. Prime Minister Kakar, when he was giving his latest address, he mentioned in order to achieve these NDCs for the global south, you need $6 trillion per year to achieve that, in order to achieve this 1.5 Celsius. As of now, even half of that is not being done. And in order to, in fact, in order to achieve half of that, you need $6 trillion. And as of now, $100 billion has been pledged, which has not been given.
Yes.
So,
it's just, these are just pledges. We're talking about talks.
So climate finance is something which is very, very, very important. And not only climate finance, as Yar was also mentioning, there's a big disparity between the technology global south is having and adopting and global north has already achieved. Now there are a lot of intellectual property rights on the technology which is with the global north over a period they've accumulated.
But Humayun, you mentioned about NDCs. What's your take on Pakistan's own NDCs? Of course, we promised things at COP26 as well. What is the progress? What needs to be done? And of course, like you mentioned about, there's a lot that needs to be done specifically regarding the technology transfer.
You know, when it comes to Pakistan, the world needs to understand that we are, in terms of our energy mix, one of the cleanest in the world. Despite that, and last year when we went into Sharm el-Sheikh, our discussion was climate justice, and that's exactly this year when we
are not begging for money.
Not
it's
at
our
all.
right.
It's our inherent right, because we are the in terms of the numbers of the country that are suffering the most in the world. We were 8 last year, and this year we are number 5. And as you already mentioned, this is going to be the hottest year recorded in our climate history. We will be suffering more, unfortunately. So in that sense, we were not the contributor. If you take the Pakistan carbon emission, we are less than 1.1% in terms of the total global mix. So in that sense, the world global south is asking the global north that, you know, you just cannot always wish away certain things and always pledge and not do much, because this is
Right.
going to be existential threat. Countries are going to lose their territory. There's
Of
going
course,
to be
migration is going to happen.
absolutely.
And it took us 30 years to reach at this point that they are kind of accepting the responsibility. So a lot needs to be done. To talk more about this, we are joined by Dr. Khalid Waleed, who is economist and senior analyst. And Dr. Khalid Waleed is also in Dubai and is, of course, maybe attending some of the COP28 sessions. Welcome to the program, Dr. Khalid Waleed. Can you tell us what has transpired so far in COP28 and how do you see Pakistan's role in advocating for climate justice?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. You can see that there is a rush and people wants to attend this COP28. I would exactly tell you that the journey that started the initiative of Pakistan in last year's COP, that was COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. Pakistan leaded the G77 group and China and started the drive of loss and damage fund. In this COP28 in Dubai, that loss and damage fund has been operationalized. There has been numerous numbers of pledges, although they are very small amounts like peanuts, but we can say that the loss and damage fund has been operationalized. Many countries have pledging, and there is over 1 billion USD worth of loss and damage fund in the account to be delivered to those countries facing the adversities. But another thing is that the civil society and organizations, they are criticizing also because the amount is very small. Just to give you an example, in Pakistan, last year's flood, 30 billion USDs were lost, and today,
Of course, in floods.
as of now, about 1.5 billion USD have been collected under loss and damage fund. So we can say that it is a start, like just the first drop of rain.
Right.
We need to go from there. We need to take off. Yep.
Right, of course, there are, of course, issues raised by, like you said, by rights organizations as well and youth organizations as well. So can you tell us about the environment over there? Of course, there is an unspoken rule of not having any political or geopolitical discussions during COP's sessions. But of course, we have seen some of the political discussions happening over there. Do you think that is going to be impacting when we talk about climate finance as well? Do you think that geopolitical alliances are going to be a factor when we talk about just distribution of this climate finance?
Yes, I would say this year's COP is a success for climate change, for climate justice in three different terms. First is that this is the first global take in which the NDCs of the country will be evaluated and re-evaluated, and new targets will be set. These are the huge success in terms of actionable climate change mechanisms. So what we need to do is we need to follow particular on the same grounds that have been pledged in COP28 for Pakistan as well. In COP28 in energy sector, tripling the renewable energy has been pledged and has been planned. Secondly, doubling the energy efficiency instruments and equipments, it has been planned. Secondly, most importantly, USA has also joined the Past Coal Alliance, which means that there would be more talk on coal retirement and fostering the renewable energy projects for Pakistan, for developing countries, and for developed countries as well. So in terms of climate justice, in terms of renewable energy, in terms of phasing out or phasing down fossil fuel.
Right, of course. Mr. Mayu, can you provide us an update on the roundtable discussions that are taking place, and of course also about the means of implementations that are being discussed, because that remains an important issue or factor when we talk about climate finance?
You know, there are numerous sessions simultaneously happening, and they're going to happen up till December 12th. The idea is to discuss multiple problems that the entire world and entire humanity, and particularly the global south, which is basically lagging behind. So one of the most important aspect which is being discussed, particularly in this ministerial level session on losses and damage, and I keep on referring to that because this is so much important for the global south. In that, there's one particular aspect which is being highlighted and which should be highlighted more, and that is basically the debt debate. The global south countries, most of them, they're basically crippling because of the debt that they have received and they have to repay over the years, and Pakistan is one prime example. In that, there is a lot of debate that the bilateral, multilateral and the private creditors, they need to restructure the debt these global south countries have to repay to the global north, and particularly the debts are mostly given by the global south. Now when we are talking about climate justice and this equity and economic durability of these countries, this is a very prime example where these countries have to take debt every year to meet their economic demands. And why they're doing that? Because they've been suffering so much. And earlier one of our panelists, Dr. Hasnan, mentioned about the losses Pakistan suffered last year to the tune of $30 billion. That was the estimate done by United Nations, and then around $14 to $15 billion was something which we needed to mitigate that. As of now, we got some pledges of $10 billion, and that has not been operationalized, and those pledges are basically investment. They were not like
of course.
So this is something which needs to be taken into account, that global south does not have the capability, does not have the capacity. So in terms of building capacity and capability of the global south, global north have to come. And why they have to come? Because it's climate justice. We did
of
not
course, and
ask
this
for
is
this.
their responsibility, moral responsibility as well. But Shehryar, what steps, what concrete steps are needed when we talk about making developed countries responsible for, of course, facilitating developing countries who are suffering from, of course, climate degradation and other issues because of the developed world? Are there some steps that are needed to be implemented?
So, Mariam, that
And
is also.
are there some discussions undergoing, or we are hoping that something concrete would be coming out of these discussions?
So, Mariam, that's also a very important question. The international debate now is revolving around the overhauling of the international financial infrastructure. How international finance is distributed, how developing countries can access it, and I'll take Humayun Saab's discussion forward, that climate finance should not be coming at the cost of development finance. So these are like two separate things.
Of course.
Developing countries not only have to develop, they have to finance their health sectors, which are obviously very undersourced. Then they have to focus on education, they have to focus on infrastructure, and a lot of like indicators that developing countries are already struggling at. Now, if you also like bring in climate finance, so this climate finance should not be coming at the cost of developing finance. So what are developing countries now saying? They are basically saying that this loss and damage fund, if developing countries have to access it, it should be in the form of grants rather than long-term loans.
So are we talking about some mechanisms here?
Yes, that is the mechanism that is being developed right now. There is still resistance coming from the developing countries, in which now this fund has been housed in the World Bank for the last 4 years. A lot of developing countries are basically criticizing the World Bank because World Bank has already historically been used to fund infrastructure projects in developing countries anyways. So these developing countries are already owing a lot of debt to the World Bank. Now if the World Bank also...
And the just distribution of this fund is also another question.
Also required.
That all are the geopolitical alliances going to be a factor in these?
So, like the developing countries, when these discussions before COP28 were taking place, this was a bone of contention. And now, for at least 4 years, the developing countries have compromised that this fund can be housed in the World Bank until or unless a better system of financing is developed. So, this is the whole debate around development or climate change finance that is like taking place. And when it comes to overhauling of the international financial institutions, that has the lead will be taken by the developed countries, unfortunately, because they're the ones who have the economic might, and they have the
infrastructure
political will as so political muscle as well. So what the collective developing countries can do, they can form a collective voice in which they basically advocate for the overhauling of the international financial infrastructure. And in that whole framework, Pakistan is playing the lead, and it is now the global voice collective of the developing countries, and they're negotiating this with the developed countries right now at the COP28.
Of course, and Dr. Khalid, given the emphasis on keeping the global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius, what kind of discussions are happening to make these developed countries responsible so that they, of course, carry on their commitments? These are not just the talks of pledges, but we see it in the form of implementable solutions coming out of the developed world.
Very pertinent question. I would say that as the Secretary General of UN said, that climate change is here and it is not global warming, boiling. So the realization is there, the operationable mechanism is there. I would agree with the talk of previous speaker that we need to some sort of agreement on that the climate finance and development finance, they should have their proper definitions. But I would move it one step higher to this, that I would say that climate finance or the development finance should be the climate resilient finance as well. We need to establish that the public investment coming into the countries.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Khalid Waleed, for providing us updates on COP28, and of course we'll continue with our discussion. Humayun, when we talk about, of course, these discussions, like Dr. Khalid also told us about organizations, rights organizations that are contributing in this summit, and of course 70,000 plus delegates are expected to be participating in this significant event. What do you think is the role of a private sector when we talk about climate finance? Of course, a lot of oil producing countries and a lot of big oil companies are also participating in this. Do you think they are going to be contributing, or they are going to be resisting these discussions?
I think this is a very important question in terms of what will be the future and how they will be taken into account when we are discussing about the current situation and the future. So having 70,000 different delegates present at COP28 in itself is a feat, by saying that the world is taking things seriously, which does not necessarily means that we have achieved what we wanted. There's so much room for improvement.
But it is said to be one of the largest COP sessions.
This is the largest one as of now, and then the presence of private sector in that, international organization, international non-governmental organizations, civil society members from all across the world.
Youth organizations.
Absolutely. So this gives us hope. At the same time, there's so much, there's a yawning gap, as Prime Minister has mentioned, in terms of the adaptation measures. But within that realm, I think there's hope that, you know, many people are taking things very seriously. Private sector has to be involved, and now it's a globalized world, and there are like many big conglomerates and many big companies which are actively not only working within their own country's realm, but they are like all across the world.
And they're influencing the government structures.
I think they're influencing government more than the government themselves are. So in that sense, it's a very, very important step that these private companies are involved. Because, you know, now we are taking this global stock taking of the last Paris Agreement, and we are discussing about what we were lacking and what we were achieving. So in that sense, private entrepreneurs and private creditors and private companies are added in that. I think this is a right step in the right direction. There's so much needs to be done, but in my opinion, this is a very successful event, and I think it may not achieve the desired result from the global south perspective, but it's just a beginning. And once this summit is over, I think there is need to be a constant reminder for the entire global south and the global north that a collaborative effort is the only way. And this is something which we have learned from COVID-19. Not a single country can ever achieve the objectives in terms of humanitarian assistance, in terms of health emergencies. Climate change is also the same existential threat which the humanity is facing. So the world has to come together.
Right.
Climate justice is basically the punchline of the global south, but there's something which global south needs to be doing at the same time.
You talked about global stock take. Can you elaborate on that? And of course, Pakistani Prime Minister Kakar also participated in that session. What are the key takeaways? And of course, we know that this is to monitor the progress of each country. Do you think there was satisfactory reports coming out from the developed countries as well as from developing countries like ours?
I think it's a very relative terminology that we should be using. There's no absolute yes or no success or failure.
But are we heading towards the right direction?
I think from the global south, yes, when the global stock taking has taken place, these NDCs that every country has to fulfill in terms of their carbon emission, in terms of mitigation, in terms of adaptation, global south needs a lot of financing, and this was basically the punchline from the global south, and Prime Minister Kakar mentioned that as well, that the pledges that were made in order for the global south to achieve those benchmarks were way short than expected. In terms of the first instance, he said that if in order to contribute the NDCs from the global south, you need $6 trillion to fulfill half the targets. As of now, the total pledges were 100 billion. I'm talking about 6 trillion for half the promises, 100 billion is the pledges. When it comes to adaptation, we need $387 billion till 2030 to achieve this 1.5 degrees target. As
and
of
it
now,
is going to be increasing every year, of course.
yes, and out of 387 billion, the pledges are 21 billion a year. So there's a huge gap. But this realization needs to be taken into account that at the highest forum, world leaders are discussing that. Not they're going to achieve that in next 1 year or 2 year or 5 year, but I think realization has started, and if they don't do that, the world at large can lose not necessarily only territory, but human resource, human life, territory, and it's an existential threat, which means the existence of human being as we know now cannot stay in the same form if we do not act now. So I think this COP28 has set a target. Next few years we are going to work on that. Every year we have to come up with new targets, and technology transfer is something
Of course,
which
that's what I want to talk about, that we have set a target, but are there some concrete mechanisms or initiatives that are focused towards bridging the gap when we talk about technology transfer to the developing countries, of course about the infrastructure development, because when we talk about renewable energy resources and shifting towards nuclear energy that is considered to be cheapest and environmental friendly, there is need for infrastructure development, like you earlier mentioned that we need a lot of infrastructure for that as well. Are there some discussions happening to bridge the gap in technology?
So Mariam, this whole discussion or the whole operationalization of the loss and damage fund, this will hinge upon only two factors at the end of the day. These two factors are the economic ability of a country and the historical responsibility of that country. According to these two indicators, the whole financing of the loss and damages fund will base upon these two indicators. Now, the transfer of technology, for that, like there needs to be a firm mechanism in which this transfer of technology cheaply and adequately happens from the global north to the global south. Other than that, moving away from traditional sources of energy to more alternative energies like solar, like wind,
environmentally friendly, that are sustainable.
And again, as Humayun Sahab mentioned, these are the technologies that the developed countries have patents over, and they would have to like let go of the whole economic system of like making profits and like selling
so
those.
Are there discussions happening to bridge this gap?
These discussions have started.
To formulate some mechanisms when we talk about technology transfer for providing actual infrastructure to the developing world?
The discussion is already taking place, but then again there needs to be a collective voice and pressure as well. Moral pressure, coming up with like one voice, and using all multilateral forums by developing countries. And now there are a lot of like mechanisms. COP28 is like a platform, then there is like G77, and all of these like multilateral institutions, when they collectively bring forward the voices of the developing countries, this will like generate pressure on. And now there are like a lot of like obligations and like fears from the developed countries as well. You know, if you look at the geopolitical situation, a lot of like crisis when it comes to food security, we've like discussed it in various programs. Other than that, a lot of like global migration,
of course,
and obviously a lot of like food shortages as well. And now because of like all of these like devastating wars that are taking place, this also has a very devastating effect on like the climate and geographical
and we are reaching the tipping points.
We are reaching the tipping point.
So lastly, briefly tell us, what are your expectations from COP28?
So for COP28, when it comes to the operationalization of the loss and damages fund, again, I believe that it's a good start, but it like falls short. $387 billion a year And now the pledges that we have gotten, they're like around 27 million. This is like a drop in the ocean, but it's a good start. Now the indicators that are coming forward are that the developed countries are seeing, and the whole like geopolitical arena in which we are like operating, we see developed countries taking more of an initiative. They will need to be convinced more. There needs to be consistent advocacy and international pressure, and for that, like, Pakistan is playing its role, but there has to be a collective voice coming in from the developed countries.
Of course. Thank you very much, Mr. Shehryar Khan, for joining us in today's program. Thank you very much, Mr. Humayun Khan, for joining us in today's program. Of course, when we talk about climate crisis, it transcends political agendas and, of course, the national boundaries of the countries. Of course, discussions at COP28 are significant that are taking place in the power corridors. But of course, we know that voices from opposition and, of course, the private sector are also being heard at these important discussions that are taking place at COP28. We are optimistic. Of course, there are challenges that are also emerging, but we are hopeful that the world is collectively going to be fighting toward this climate crisis. And of course, Pakistan has always been a strong advocate for the developing world, and of course, Pakistan's voice is being heard at COP28 as well. That's all from Game Changer tonight. Take care. Allah Hafiz.